A very good evening to all. It's time for Children's Bedtime Treasury with Let Emotions Speak. Don't forget to like the video, share the video, and subscribe to my channel for more bedtime stories each night. Today's story is about Jack and the Beanstalk. Once there was an old woman who lived with her only son, Jack, in a tumble-down cottage in a meadow by a pine forest. The old woman and her son were very poor, and they were getting poorer as each winter passed. After one particularly cruel and cold winter, when the ground had frozen like ice, the old woman turned to her son and said, "Jack, there's only one thing left to sell. You must take the old brown cow to market tomorrow and sell her. She's all that is left between us and starvation. So mind you get a good price." So the next morning, Jack took the old brown cow and started the long journey into town. Halfway through his journey, Jack stopped to eat his crust of bread. Just then, a farmer passed by and stopped to chat. After Jack told the farmer where he was heading and why, the farmer looked at the old cow and scratched his chin thoughtfully. He put his hand into his pocket and said to Jack, "I'll swap you these dried beans for your old brown cow." Jack looked at those beans in the farmer's hand and shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I must take the old brown cow to sell at the market so that my mother and I can buy bread." The farmer promised Jack that if he would swap the cow for the beans, Jack would make his fortune. Jack finally agreed and went home with the beans in his pocket. When he got home, he told his mother about his adventure. But his mother cried when Jack told her the old brown cow was gone and all they had were dried beans. She snatched the beans from Jack's hand and threw them out of the window in anger. Just as dawn was breaking, Jack woke up to discover a huge beanstalk had shot up during the night right outside his window. He ran downstairs and looked at the huge beanstalk. It was taller than even the tallest trees in the nearby pine forest and disappeared into the clouds. Jack decided to climb the beanstalk. Jack climbed and climbed. He climbed so high that when he looked down, the tumble-down cottage was a tiny peck far below. The top of the beanstalk was still out of sight, so he climbed some more. Eventually, Jack climbed through the clouds and was amazed when he got to the top of the stalk to discover another land very different from the one he'd left below. Everything was huge. The trees were enormous, the grass came up to Jack's shoulder, and in the distance was the largest castle he had ever seen. Just as Jack was starting out towards the castle, he heard a thunderous rustling in the grass behind him, and he looked around to see a huge giantess towering above him. Not much meat on those bones," she said, "so I won't bother to eat you. However, you might come in handy around the house to do all the boring chores." And with that, she picked Jack up, popped him into the pocket of her apron, and carried him into the castle. On the way, she warned Jack not to let her husband, the giant, see him. "The last houseboy I had was made into jam and is looking for another to pound into bread," she said quite calmly. Soon, Jack felt the castle shudder at the approach of the giant, and he hid behind the coal scuttle. "Fee, fee, fo, fum," roared the giant. "I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be him live or be him dead, I'll break his bones to make my bread." "Don't be silly," said the giantess. "You've never once changed your socks, and it's your feet you can smell." Satisfied with this answer, the giant sat down and started to count his money. Jack sneaked a peek from his hiding place and saw a mountain of gold coins piled high on the table. Then the giant scooped it all back into the purse, put his feet on the table, and fell sound asleep. When the thunderous snores convinced Jack that it was safe, he sneaked up onto the table. The purse was within reach, and Jack dragged it onto the edge of the table, where it fell with a tremendous clunk onto the floor. The giant slept on. Quickly, Jack climbed down and dragged the purse to the castle door and down to the meadow, and then down the beanstalk. When Jack finally got back with his treasure, he showed it to his mother, who hugged him with joy and warned him never to climb the beanstalk again. But Jack decided that he would go back to the castle to find some more treasures, and when morning came again, he got dressed and went down to the beanstalk to start the long climb all over again. Before he left the house, he tied a red scarf around his head and painted freckles on his face, so that when he reached the top of the beanstalk and once again met the giantess, she would not recognize him. Once again she picked up Jack, popped him into her apron pocket, and warned him about the terrible giant. Once more, Jack hid as the castle trembled at the giant's approach. "Fee, fee, fo, fum," roared the giant. "I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be him live or be him dead, I'll break his bones to make my bread," said the giantess. "The only thing you can smell is your armpits, which have never been washed." Satisfied with this answer, the giant sat down and called for his hen to be brought to him. Jack peeked around and saw, to his amazement, that the hen had laid a beautiful golden egg. Before long, the giant rested his head once more, then fell fast asleep. When Jack heard the snoring, he sneaked up onto the table and gently took the hen, then quickly climbed down and carried it to the castle door, down to the meadow, and then down to the beanstalk. When Jack returned once more with his treasure, his mother was waiting for him, and when Jack showed her the hen, she hugged him and begged him never to climb the beanstalk again. But once again, Jack thought about the treasures in the castle, and the following morning he went down to the beanstalk to start the long climb all over again. This time, before he left the house, he tied a blue scarf around his head and rubbed dirt into his face, and once again, when he reached the top of the beanstalk and met the giantess, she did not recognize him. As before, she picked up Jack, popped him into her apron pocket, and warned him about the giant. Again the castle trembled at the approach of the giant. "Fee, fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be him live or be him dead, I'll break his bones to make my bread," said the giant once again. "What rot," said the giantess. "That'll be all those bugs in your hair that have never been combed." Once more, satisfied, the giant sat down and called for his harp to be brought to him. When the giant plucked at the strings of the harp, it magically started to sing in a clear soprano voice. The giant was soon lulled into a deep slumber across the table, and Jack wanted the beautiful harp so much that he didn't even wait for the snores. Jack climbed up to the table and put his hands on the harp to sneak it from under the nose of the sleeping giant. But to his horror, the harp started to shriek. "Help! Help! I'm being stolen!" The giant woke up. With a mighty roar, he shouted, "Fee, fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be him live or be him dead, I'll break his bones to make my bread." And with that, he raced after Jack. But the giant wasn't as nimble as Jack, and Jack was able to rush out of the castle down to the meadow and reach the top of the beanstalk, with the giant in pursuit. Jack climbed down as quickly as possible, But the giant was not far behind him. The further down Jack climbed, the closer the giant got to him. When Jack was nearly at the bottom, he called to his mother to fetch the wood axe, and then Jack jumped the rest of the way to the ground. He grabbed at the axe and started to chop furiously at the stalk. The giant was almost down when the beanstalk crashed to the ground. Right on top of him, the giant was squashed to nothing. Now, with all the gold they had, Jack and his mother never needed to worry about money again. So kids, I hope you enjoyed this story. Do let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now it's time to say goodbye and good night.